everyone. Today we are going to discuss on topic of paying bank. So here the banker who pays by check to the customer or the order of the customer. So here banks or banker collects from the customer and they pay to the customer. So they collect as an check or a bills of exchange and they pay to the customers. The banker holds the check from the drawer and is obliged to make the payment in the funds of the customer are sufficient to cover the amount is check as drawn. So the banker must check whether the amount is sufficient in the account and the check is drawn properly and presented properly to the banker. So these are the important duties to be followed by the banker while collecting the check or the bills of exchange from the customer. So in order to safeguard his positions, the paying banker has to observe certain precautions while honoring the check. So before honoring the check, the banker must check what are the precautions to be taken, what are the important procedures to be followed by the banker before paying to the customer while collecting the check from the customer. The first one is presentation of the check. So while presenting the check, the banker must see the following precautions: type of the check, branch, account, banking hours, and mutilation. Now usually there are two types of check. One is open check, other one is cross check. Now usually open check where the banker must check the proper details are written on the check. And when there is a crossed check, the banker must be very careful about the check and amount to be deposited to the same account while paying to the customer. Otherwise, the banker become the liable for the loss occurred while paying to the customer. So that is why the banker must check the check is the open or a crossed. Now here the account payee need not worry about the paying banker. They can move it to the collecting banker. They can give it to the collecting banker. The responsibility is forwarded to the collecting banker. So now here the branch. The banker must check whether the customer has written the check of the same branch or of the another branch. That is very important. If it is the same branch, then immediately they can deposit or pay to the customer. Whether it is from the other branch, then banker must see which branch it is and whether they are having a proper details, proper account with another branch. They have to find out the branch throughout and properly, then only they can pay to the customers or move or forward it the customer's payment. Account. Now usually the customer can have more than one account. So the banker must check which account is of the customer. So based on the account, if there are two or more accounts with a customer, the which account they have to pay, which account they have to deposit, that must be properly checked by the banker. If anything mistake occurs, then the directly banker will be liable for kind of mistakes or any kind of banking hours. A banker must check whether the check is drawn on the business days of the bank. So if it is out of the banking hours, they cannot accept the check or bills of exchange. Only during the working hours they have to check. And after collecting the check within the working hours, immediately they have to verify the check and then they have to move forward it to the collecting banker for the payment of for the customers. Mutilation. A banker must check whether the check is torn, whether the check is folded, whether the check is not written properly, or whether the check is overwritten on the check. These things to be checked by the. Then only if the check is proper, there is no tone on the check, there is no overwriting in the check, and the signature is there, everything is there, proper it is, then only they have to drop. Otherwise, immediately they have to dishonor and inform the customer about the mutilation. Immediately they have to inform the customer, provide a good service to the customers. Next, form of the check. There are printed form, unconditional order, date, amount, and material alteration. Now, the banker only they have to only accept the printed form of the check, which is given by the banks to the customers, because the printed one is better than the written one. So they have to clearly check whether the check is based to the banks related to the banks, or it is written or printed properly. Unconditional order. So banker has to accept or honor only those checks without any conditions of the check. If there are certain conditions, then they cannot accept or honor the check. Only in the case of unconditional order, they have to accept the check. Otherwise, they cannot accept the check. Any conditions, any limitations on the check, they cannot accept. Then they have to see the date. Based on the date, proper date they have to mention, because every check has a maturity of 3 months. So they have to check when they have collected the check, they have to see the date of the check, whether it is mentioned properly or not. Then amount. There are two options writing in on the check. One is in numbers, another one is in figures. So both have to be by the customers. So the banker duty is to check whether the customer has written on the numbers or in the words, figures and the words. Both they have to check. Then only they have to accept. Otherwise they cannot honor the check. Then material alteration. If any kind of material alterations, are made on the check, that cannot be accepted until and unless they have to accept it. Alteration requires confirmation. When there is a alteration confirmation, then only they can accept it. Otherwise, they cannot accept. And when they are made, the customers are made alteration with the full signature confirmation, alteration requires drawer confirmation, and with the full signature, then only they can accept and they can pay to the customer. Otherwise, they cannot pay to the customers. Without any objection, they can honor. So next one is sufficient balance. It is very important whether the customers are having sufficient balance while making the payment. If the customers are not having enough balance in the account, or whether the account has zero balance or less balance, then they cannot accept the check. They have to dishonor the check and inform the customers. So this is very important. Otherwise, what happens? The banker is to liable for the insufficient balance. Okay, they have to bear the consequences. That is why they have to be very careful while before honoring the check. They have to check the account balance of the customer. Signature of the drawer, whether the signature is proper, whether the signature is matching with the customer. If the signature is not matched with the customer, then they have to dishonor the check or ask the customer for another check, write another check, or changes in any kind of the signature. They have to make notary and submit to the bank with the form. Endorsement. Now here, before honoring a check, the banker verify regularity of the endorsement. If any that appears on the instrument, it is more so in the case of order check. Now endorsement usually in the order check, which requires the endorsement before the delivery. If it is ordered check, immediately they have to go for the endorsement. Now, if the banker must find out the existence of the authority, failure to do so constitutes negligence on the part of the paying banker. That is why the banker has to be very careful when there is a ordered check. Then legal part. Now, the existence of legal part, like garnishee order, limits the duty of the banker to pay the check. So here also they have to identify, they have to see, the banker has to check the garnishee order, otherwise they have to be liable. Next, minor precautions. Now, here it is, the banker must see that whether there is any order of the customer not to pay a check. Sometimes customer asks the banker not to pay to the check for that check. So immediately the banker has to stop pay on that check. Immediately they have to take an action and they have to stop. If the customer is requesting the banker, maybe the check is returned but later they want to stop the payment. So customer asks the banker, immediately have to stop the payment. Then the banker must stop. Next, now the banker must see whether there are any evidence or misappropriation of money. So kind of breach of trust we say. If this case is happened, immediately banker has to dishonor the check or stop payment to that account of the check. That they have to be very careful. Then the banker must see whether he has got any information about the death or insolvency or insanity of the customer. Now immediately sometimes maybe the check has been presented to the bank and suddenly death happens. So that I have to identify whether the person is alive or not. So immediately if it is the case of death, then immediately they have to stop the payment. They have to stop the payment of the to the customer's account. Same way, if failures to note the instruction will land him into trouble. So that is why the banker must check all these things carefully, take certain precautions, proper precautions. Otherwise, a banker will be liable. Banker will fall into the trouble, and banker must face the legal orders. That is why they have to be very careful. Thank you.